Working Cows Podcast, episode 363. This episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. And this episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature a number of Understanding Ag's regenerative farming and ranching experts on the podcast over the years. In that time, Understanding Ag's reputation for helping producers understand and successfully and profitably apply money-saving regenerative principles and practices has only grown. And there are two primary reasons for that. First, Understanding Ag's consultants are farmers and ranchers who've been there, done that on their own regenerative farms. And second, Understanding Ag's consultants aren't in the business to sell you costly inputs. They get no commissions and you get no pressure. Just profit-building solutions for your operation. Learn more at understandingag.com and discover the hope in healthy soil. That's www.understandingag.com. Very excited to be joined today by Tyson Hewitt. Tyson is an elder at the church I pastor, but he's also a real estate agent and a broker in here in South Dakota. They're licensed. Hewitt Land Company is licensed in Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana. And we're going to talk to him today about getting ready to sell the ranch or getting ready to buy a ranch. How do you get ready? What are some of the things that he's seen help contribute to success in real estate transactions over his career and in his experience? How have people prepared for real estate transactions in a way that has helped them be more successful? So, Tyson, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Yes, sir, Clay. Thanks for the invite. Been looking forward to it.
Yeah. I guess we're talking real estate today. What's your kind of take on the real estate market right now? Where are things at? Where has it been? Where's it headed?
Well, it sure has been good, and it feels like just a broken record for the last, I've been licensed personally for about 20 years now, and so we've seen a little bit of up and down, nothing like the 80s or anything like that. Not me personally. I was born in the 80s, so so I didn't get in on any of that, but it just, every time it gets high, you think this should top it out and plateau and maybe level off, and then you'll hit a new high again. And obviously locally in here, we see it fluctuate just a little bit, nothing like Iowa or some of that ground. I remember several years ago we sold a ranch to a guy that sold his property in Iowa. He was expecting it to bring about $11,000, ended up bringing $13,000 to $15,000. We just thought there's no way it can get higher, and it's doubled since then. So you never know, but it seems strong. I mean, demand is good, interest is good, and there's a lot of people want to own real estate.
Yep. Where do you see most of the people coming to you from? Are they locals, out of state? Good mix of the two?
Depends on what the property is. If it's good, usable grassland here, locally speaking, the local market is pretty strong. A lot of the business that we do is with local buyers and sellers, or at least with the South Dakota address. We're licensed in 5 states, North and South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. But a lot of it is fairly local business when it comes to like grass ranches, grass properties, summer grass, and those kind of deals. If you get into like the dry land farm ground market, there'll be a huge investor pool that's looking for property there. Dryland farm ground's relatively easy to manage in that you lease it out. You've got a tenant that takes care of everything. You don't have to worry about infrastructure and fences and upkeep and overgrazing and things like that. So there's a very strong demand for the outside population for that kind of property. Also, for a while in there, we were sure seeing a lot of interest from Minnesota, actually, Minnesota and Iowa, maybe selling some property. There's a certain level of appeal when you can trade a quarter section of ground out there and buy several thousand acres out here, you know. So that's kind of what seems to capture most of our market attention.
And you think that what drives that interest in specific dryland crop acres is the fact that, or what maybe dials back the interest in grassland is what you mentioned, the infrastructure, the upkeep, the overgrazing threat. Some of those things make it a little harder to do from an absentee standpoint. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think there's certainly some of that. Yeah, that for whatever reason, there is just an appeal in the farmland, and then a lot of savvy investors. I mean, think that the farm ground is where it's at. Is where when it boils down to it. The farmland really on a national or even global level gets a lot of attention. I mean, when you listen to Ag Radio, they spend a lot of time talking about corn and soybeans, you know, and certainly rightly so. And the cattle get some attention, but most of it's farm ground, and I think that has something to do with the ideology back in the general public for owning farm ground. Now, a ranch, on the other hand, too, is just like the 4.6 is selling in some of those big ranches, there's still a certain interest level in owning a ranch. So a straight grass, commodity grass type property doesn't seem to have the investor drive that farmland does, and then you've got also the ranch type, especially if it was a picturesque. I mean, like Montana gets so much interest that they've got some unique property and some scenery and things like that. And there's certainly some people out there that want to own a ranch as well. That's not usually on an income generation basis, more of an enjoyment factor, right. But that's kind of what we see.
Well, you look at the cash rent, right? What are we at? You know, you can pick any number you want. It'll be wrong. Somebody will be able to say, no, it's this right. or that. But, I mean, it's probably in the neighborhood of 10 times more cash rent on a piece of crop ground as
right.
it is grass, right?
Right. You know, a lot of what we see is, kind of a return on investment type number. Your grass is going to be in that 1.5% to 2% return on investment range, you know, unless you can kind of find a special situation. Whereas that farm ground, you can kind of get into more of a 3.5%. I've heard up to 4 or so, but so there's a little better, and there's some insurance out there, crop insurance and things like that help support that as well, of course, and not say that there's not some insurance opportunities in the grassland as well, but there's maybe a little more safety net on that for tenants and landlords both. So
yeah, I'll never forget sitting in the High Plains Ranch Practicum in Dallas Mount, pulled up this chart and said, if this ranch, and the people were sitting in the room, said if this ranch had been using PRF insurance over the last 20 years, they'd be $200,000 farther ahead today than they are.
Wow.
You know, and so, I mean, the PRF exists. I call it pray for rain insurance, even though it's PRF. But anyways, it exists, and it is something that works, until it doesn't. Like last year, there were some pretty big premiums paid by a lot of people because we had a wet western United States. And so it doesn't hit every year, but if you stay in the game long enough, their algorithms and all those things are good enough now that they can really make that work for everybody. And it's the same as crop insurance. It doesn't work without the subsidy. So at the end of the day, you got to decide if you want to be a subsidy farmer or not.
Right.
And,
if you want to get in and learn the system and whatnot or not. That's got my eyes were opened a little bit to that this last fall, actually, more so than anything, and was talking to a guy about that same exact deal. And like you say, the premiums kind of make you stand up and think about it. But boy, what he was talking about on the return, there's some programs out there. I mean, there's some safety nets out there working both ways, and so like you say, you just decide if you want to be part of them or not. But
right, I won't call it foreign. We'll just say non-local investment in ranch land is all Taylor Sheridan's fault. That's
right. Made it look pretty good,
right?
Yeah,
and he ended up with the 4.6s, right? Is that it?
Yeah, right.
So kind of interesting, come full circle there. But when we talk about the actual ins and outs of selling the ranch, what are some of the things that you've seen lead to success in preparing a property for sale and getting it ready to sell?
Every property is unique and individual and has its own unique characteristics and makeup, right? And the same with every seller. And so just depends on what the property is. Are the sellers operating it now? Is it such that it was the family ranch and they've leased it out for a period of time and they've decided to sell, or what's motivated the sale? But honestly, at the end of the day, managing expectations and realizing what actually your property is worth is a big step in the right direction. Everything has a value. A below average property is not going to bring above average money. Usually not going to, no matter how much, lipstick you put on the pig, so to speak. But just having the property and presentation is a real thing. Clean up the junk, gather the trash and get it kind of organized as best you can. Obviously there's some situations where we deal definitely with people that maybe have never even seen the property. So it just depends on what their accessibility is to the property, what they can do. And then they have to just realize what the possibilities are with what they're willing to invest into it. I would not suggest, if the fences are in adequate shape and usable, I would not suggest going out and building brand new fencing things. If they're absolutely falling down, if you can tidy them up and do some of that, that might be an investment worth doing. Like in the house market, you don't go in and put new carpet in before you sell it, because I'll guarantee it'll be the wrong color and they'll rip it out. So if you're done with it, I'd say kind of walk away. But as far as the infrastructure is, to the extent that you're able, leave it in good shape, leave grass standing where there's grass. And if it's crop ground, get the weeds sprayed, fences, get them snugged up as good as you can, and pick up the trash and things like that. I would say, similarly speaking, the title work on a property can be surprising at times. More often than not is surprising. We've sold property that were owned by the same family since the homestead days. Part of it was homestead property, and it may be a deal where it was a father and some sons, and they had a partnership, and years ago they split the partnership up, but come to find out 30 years later, one of the brothers still had a third undivided interest in part of the property.
Yeah.
And we were able to go back and contact them and get that cleaned up and removed. But there's some of that kind of thing that is good to get ironed out before you go. And if we list a property, or especially an auction property, one of the first things we do is order a preliminary title report from the title company, your local title company there, and they'll do a title search and figure out what all there is, easements and owners and reservations and restrictions and things like that will all show up on the title report. So those are good things to have identified anyway, for sure.
Yeah, you talk about infrastructure improvements not necessarily being the way to go, and just think about it. In our neighborhood, I think I heard you quote recently $3,000 a mile for materials. I think installed, some of that's going to be closer to $10,000 a mile.
I think so.
And we talk about $800 an acre on the high end. Some in our neighborhood, maybe more, maybe less for grass. But you're going to have to sell 20 acres just to pay for the 1 mile of fence improvement, and then you start talking about, well, there's what is there? 4 miles of fence around a half section,
yeah.
Around a full section. So it starts to go, oh well, maybe let's just put some more clips on.
Yep, and that's then your stretcher looks pretty good. And yep, so just tidy it up. Like you say, when you drive into a place, you like to be able to look around and say, we can change a few things, but gosh, you don't want them to think I need to buy a bulldozer when I get this place too, if at all possible.
Yeah, you talk about starting with a realistic expectation. What are some of the most consistently good ways to value a property? What are some of the things that you start saying, well, here's a way that's going to realistically translate to the market?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because, most property, I mean, any auction, real estate auction you go to on egg ground is sold so many dollars times however many acres they're figuring. So dollars per acre is a real thing, and it's a legitimate thing. But we do also tell people not to get too hung up on that. Historically, what has the property run? I mean, if it will summer 100 pair, then let's kind of figure that out a little bit. Or if it'll historically run year round 200 pair, or whatever the operation is. But years ago, in the last several 3-4 years, we sold a lot of ranches from $12,000 to about $15,000 per cow. Meaning at $15,000 a cow, if it'll run 300, it'd bring $4.5 million. Those figures are different today, but I'll tell you, in South Dakota, it's been a while since there's been a real straight legitimate ranch sale. But today it would be more like $20,000, $22,000, $23,000, $4,000 a cow, I think, in South Dakota. And your summer grass that used to be bringing about $8,000 to $10,000 a cow is going to be more about 10 to 12 or maybe 13 or so. So dollars per acre is certainly a legitimate thing, but you can also check your work, so to speak, when you bring it back on a valuation per unit, that it will run. And those are kind of the tendencies we're seeing now. If you kind of look around, they're in that, $10,000 to $12,000 per cow for a summer grass unit, and that's divided on how many acres it is. Divide that by how many acres it is, gives you your dollars per acre, and usually those kind of line up with what you're thinking. And then obviously, South Dakota is a easy state to do your research in. Everything's open information. Anybody can go to the courthouse and look up. You can go look up what I paid for my place, and how many acres it is and what the taxes are, and so it's all open. So you can get a hold of the local county and find out what some egg sales have been in that area. And that'll also give you a real good idea. And that's a service we provide as well. But there's a lot of prospective sellers and buyers both that are pretty well educated anymore these days. There's a lot of information out there on the web, and so it's pretty easy to kind of get at least a real good feel for what's going on.
Right. And when you talk about selling, buying, what are some of the financing options that are out there that you have seen be successful? Sure.
Yeah. Some of the financing locally, I'll tell you, there's some good banks locally here that go to work for you, and it would pay off to do a little research and find out what is the best fit for you and your operation. There's some of these credit unions around here that are doing quite a little egg business anymore, and they'll operate on some different terms than some of the egg banks. Yet it's also one of those things where those egg banks have been there for 100 years, and there's a reason. They're around and can stay staffed as well. So do some looking around. That's your typical traditional conventional lending. Also, the Farm Service Agency anymore has been a very good tool, and different counties are different, or different offices. There's some easier offices to get through, I guess, maybe we should say. But at the end of the day, some of them have been very willing to work with you, and that's a useful tool. They'll take a second position on a mortgage, so that'll let a conventional mortgage or maybe even a seller carry back some of the paper and keep the first position. So that's an important deal. For a long time, very early on when I got licensed, we were doing some contract for deeds, and then for a long time that was just almost non-existent. And now you're hearing about a few of them. Today I don't even know what prime interest is right now exactly, but most of the money you're going to borrow in the bank right now is give or take 8%. So you can get it's a little more appealing maybe for a seller to carry back the papers on a property now. And there have been a couple of trades here locally that sold very well on a total money figure, and the seller did a contract for deed at a reduced rate, but still on that many dollars, it adds up quite a little. And the seller or the buyer was actually able to give them that what I thought was a very high above market price. It ended up bringing more than I thought it would, but by the time you factor in some cheap interest, after you get done paying for it in 20 years, it's about the same money spent. So there's some opportunities there that are worth considering for sure. Another tool that's out there, I guess, that really is a very large part of our business is not per se financing, but the 1031 tax-deferred exchange is a tool that's pretty unique. I mean, it's a nice deal. It just allows you to sell property and then reinvest all of that money back into your replacement property without paying the capital gains tax. There's certainly a set of parameters that you need to follow, and you need to go through the right channels and talk to the right people. But
like, for example, you can't sell a gym in Kansas and buy a ranch in Texas or in South Dakota. It's got to be similar business, right?
Like kind property. And honestly, you can actually do a 1031 tax deferred exchange on a lot of things. You can sell cattle and equipment on a 1031, but that's a real narrow. I think if you sell steers, you need to buy back steers or breeding stock for breeding stock. The real estate market is pretty open. It's property held for investment, or it's a like kind exchange. So I know we've had guys sell apartment buildings or commercial buildings and come buy ranches, and the other way around. We've sold ranches and gone and bought commercial buildings or farm ground. So and that's what, honestly, all of that, what I mentioned before, the interest we're getting out of Minnesota and Iowa, they'll sell that. I mean, it's ground that maybe they gave, or Grandpa gave $50 an acre for it years ago, and they're bringing $25,000 a day. That's a lot of tax to pay, So if you can get out of that and you're reinvesting all that money anyway, that 1031 tax for exchange is a real good tool. I mean, if you're going to keep that money in property, if you're going to cash out, that's different. But certainly worth looking into and having the conversation about. So not a financing tool, but it's a pretty prominent way of the way we do business. I mean, I'll bet a quarter of our deals have some involvement with the 1031.
Wow. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that when you started out, there wasn't much of that there was a lull in the contract for deed. Do you think that what's driving the return of that is aging ranchers, like people who are kind of in a place where they're able to do it, for one, from that seller financing or contract for deed perspective, but then also they don't have that successor coming up behind them to take over, and they want to help a younger person get started. Do you think that that's part of it, or is that not maybe reflected in what you're seeing?
I think a lot of times there's not as much the help the younger guy isn't, and I'm not trying to be hard on the people. It's their property. If they want to sell it and cash out, certainly able to do so. And a lot of times, honestly, at that point, it's the next generation that we're working for. We've got a couple of deals right now that we're working on that that are basically for the estate, and the heirs have decided to sell it. And it's, if you've got three people, maybe two of them are in a position where they could carry it, and one of them says, "I'd sure like to have my money now." And so that's, a lot of them do get cashed out that way. I think at this level, like the one I was talking about there earlier, that I think they had a dollar figure that they wanted to hit. And if they could get, as long as they get that and offer some financing, that would work. And in that situation, they're as heirs, I'm going to call them younger for sure anyway. And so I think for quite a while in there, the interest rate was 2 to 5.5%. And so it was kind of like, if I can just take the money, I'll just do that. It's not really right, and then we'll be done with it. Not to mention that for a while in there was certainly some of these people that saw things through the 80s, and they didn't want to get the property back. If something was to foreclose, and like I say, 20 years ago, some of this ground was bringing $100 an acre, and now it's bringing $800 to $1,200. And so you think, I'm going to cash out now. It can't get any higher. And if you carry the paper on it, and several years down the road you get it back, they sure didn't want the market to be 300 or something. So I think most of them just wanted to get cashed out, get it done, and move on to the next thing. So
Sure. Do you see an opportunity presented by the age of the ranching population? Is that something that you guys are paying attention to and saying there's an opportunity here? A lot of this land's going to change hands in the next 10 years. And maybe they've been saying that all along. I don't know, but it seems like I hear more and more all the time that this is going to really shift in the next few years or decade or whatever. Do you see that coming?
Well, you sure have thought. Same thing. You hear the same things at times, and you think there's a lot of people not coming back to the ranch. I would say, and Clay, you know, we're basically next door neighbors here. So we're Mud Butte, South Dakota is where we're talking here, and locally speaking, I would say that there's a fairly decent amount of young guys, and I'm gonna call us young in the middle-aged young guys, I guess, anyway. But that's I feel like locally speaking, at least anyway, there's quite a few people that do want to come and carry on the ranch. Granted, there's also certainly some other properties that, I mean, as we've gone along here through the years, there's properties you look at and you think that property is going to sell one of these days. And so opportunity, I'm not wanting to be any kind of vulture or anything like that, but just from a standpoint of what is going to happen. Yeah, there's going to be some property open up. Now, like you say, it'll be available. Will there be a contract for deed? Will they work a young guy in? There's a handful of them that have, certainly, but that's a rarity. I would say that's by far not the norm. It's going to be. I would encourage, if somebody's out there looking to buy property, and especially if you're kind of a first time buyer and you don't have a family, or the net worth that some of these lenders are looking for and the cash involved, I would suggest, find what you can kind of handle, even if it maybe isn't your dream property. Maybe find what you can handle and talk to the FSA and kind of do some homework and things like that, and try and get your foot in the door. And then when you kind of get some credit history and some something built there, I think the opportunities can come.
Yeah, I definitely think it's true. You create your own opportunity. If you're sitting there waiting for a ranch to fall out of the sky, good luck with that. Just keep buying lottery tickets, I guess is kind of how that's going to work.
Right. Right.
But if you're out there hustling, working and building relationships with people and just, throwing out feelers, eventually those things, I think, will come together if you continue to be diligent in it. I
agree with that. I had a young friend that was looking for a property, and we looked at a lot of properties, and I never was able to find him one that he got done. And I can have my own opinion, but he stayed diligent looking for what he wanted, and finally was able to find what he was looking for, and made a deal and owns a place now. And so I would say like I say, that managing your expectations, I think, is a realistic thing. You decide what you want and how, the extent you're willing to go to get that, and we'll by all means jump in and help you as much as possible. But especially today, these ranches are so few and far between. When the one comes up that's got really good feed base and a river running through it and natural protection everywhere, they're not going to negotiate on the price likely, and B, it's not going to last very long. So, that's those are just some reality factors of the market right now.
Yep. So you talked about the owner financed options and some of those things. Are there ways of structuring those that are more secure for the seller, or are there good things to, just good ways to put those in place that makes it a good option? I mean, it just seems like a more risky option, and I guess maybe that's just that's the way we're going to approach it. But I just wondered if there's things that you've seen that worked really well that made it a better fit.
Sure. I don't know exactly, and like I say, every situation is different, and every person's risk tolerance is different as well. And so, I haven't necessarily seen them. Some ideas or thoughts I've had is if someone's transitioning and they own all the cattle and all the equipment and the land and everything already, maybe the agreement is, and part of a hedge is you brand a certain X number of the steer calves or whatever with the seller's brand or something, where he's got something coming at the end of the day or whatever it is. Also, there is in South Dakota at least And I think South Dakota Beginning Farmer Fund is a deal that is out there. It's a program at the state level that favors a seller that is willing to do a contract for deed. I think they are exempt from some income tax on the interest income generated from the financing the property, up to like $500,000 of the principal or something like that. But there's some of those kind of things that don't really provide a safety net, but maybe an incentive. At the end of the day, if you go toes up, that's kind of the deal. You're getting the property back, or I guess. But I think there could be some ways in there to kind of keep hold of, like I say, the livestock or whatever it is. Now that doesn't necessarily always fit, but maybe it's a thought, at least in the short term, to get something done.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature some of the world's leading regenerative ag and adaptive grazing experts on our show. And many of those experts are farmer, rancher instructors from the nonprofit Soil Health Academy. This year, you'll have several opportunities to experience and profit from attending one of their remarkable on-farm schools and workshops. Whether you're interested in learning more about diversifying corn and bean rotations to increase profitability, merging multiple species and marketing, grazing on the high plains and in northern environments, regenerative farming and ranching, or enhancing profits and production in your beef or dairy operation, the Soil Health Academy has a school for you. One of the best investments you can make is in yourself, so visit soilhealthacademy.org to learn more and register. Financial assistance scholarships are available. We talk about types of sales. What are the options? What are kind of just depends on what the seller wants, or different things like that as far as auctions and ways of structuring even auctions, absolute versus other kinds or whatever. Talk to me about some of the things that you are paying attention to when you're thinking about how are we going to actually move this property.
What's the best way to market? Yep, right. And honestly, from the property itself, one of the biggest things I do love auctions. They can be a high stress, but I'm kind of an event guy. I guess I like the intensity of the marketing campaign and the showings and the sense of urgency about an auction. But they're definitely not for everybody, and they're definitely not for every property. For a property to be a good auction candidate, it should have really good access. It should be something that you can split into multiple parcels to gather more buyers. I mean, if it's 10,000 acres, you want to get it down a little more bite size to where you can get 8 different buyers in there competing, or the little guys in there competing for it, as well as then you can tie it together as well. But it's got to have enough access points on it and to be divisible, into those kind of at least multiple parcels. And so that's that. Another factor is, and that would be kind of out in this country, for me, most of that property, East River, if it's a quarter section of farm ground, I think the only way to sell it's by auction. Honestly, I don't know how you would price it at the top, and I mean, those auctions have been setting new highs. It just seems, not everyone, but by and large, they just sell very well at auction. So
yeah, what did they say at the auction barn when you're selling livestock? True price discovery, right?
Yeah, right.
And I really think that in a market like this, and especially a couple of years ago, and I'm not as in tune with it as I was then, but when they just keep setting new records, even on residential properties, it's like you almost can't list that. You have to auction it because you don't really know what it's worth.
You have no idea how much could be left on the table.
People from California living in their campers,
Right.
and they're looking for a place where they don't have to go somewhere to dump the septic system.
Right.
I mean, they're motivated. So I think that some of those things are reasons why auctions are really attractive.
I agree. Right. And especially in certain neighborhoods, and there's still some neighborhoods out here that, frankly, there's some terrific neighborhoods where a neighbor or a set of neighbors are not going to bid against another neighbor type deal in face to face, and that's honestly a a great community, but maybe a poor auction property type deal. And I'm not saying you got to have bad blood, but to have an effective auction, you got to have some enough buyers that are willing to go. There's going to be
winners and there's going to be losers.
Yeah, they've got to go toe to toe for it, and somebody's going to be the one left standing there. Right. So those are some factors as well. Different communities are better auction communities than within the market. There's lots of little markets around you, locally speaking, and so those are in even regions. We have had I'll say specific counties, I guess, anyway, that have been very good to us. We've been able to do some good business there, and it's good property, but we've had some private treaty listings there, and we've had some auctions there, and by far have outsold the auctions on as a private treaty listing. We've gotten along a lot better than the auctions have in certain areas, and so that's kind of an interesting fact, I guess, anyway. Yep. And then like I say, in other areas, there's no other way in my mind but to auction that thing. And then, of course, also, like we said, every set of sellers is different too. It may be such that the sellers are motivated sellers, and they say, you know what, this market, whatever it brings, is going to be good enough. I've found another property I want to buy, and I need to move this to get that done. The timeliness of an auction, you sell it on your terms, your day, and however long it takes to get that done. We usually need at least 6 to 8 weeks to advertise an auction, and then another 6 weeks to close it. But you're going to have the money in hand, within a total of 14, 15 weeks, and it'll be a done deal, and you can move on. So if that's a factor, then that can be appealing too. Another thing is sometimes, unfortunately, there's some disagreement, some squabbles, and usually auctions, to get all parties at the same table and negotiate back and forth on a private treaty listing is going to be difficult. Maybe let's just sell it. We'll set our terms, whether you're going to reserve the minerals or not, or whatever the possession is, outline the terms before the auction, and then just go that way. And then all that's left is deciding who the buyer is and what the price tag is. So some of that kind of stuff works better in different of those situations as well. Do
you have a preference as far as auction structure? Absolute. Otherwise, is it kind of case by case, or
probably kind of case by case? I think if the decision has been made to sell it in some situations, and there's some properties that the longer they go on, they're not going to get better. Whether it's operations or whatever, somebody's health or whatever has happened. If you decide to move on, maybe absolute's the way to go. And I've talked to there's quite a few brokers in our area that have been here a long time and done business. And if you you can talk to three of them and get three different answers. And some of them are going to say absolute's the only way to go. And I'm not going to stand on that and die on that hill, I guess, anyway. In some situations, they probably are, or if a property has been kind of, thrown on the market and pulled back, and, if they've teased the market a little bit with it before, if you're serious about selling it, there's times it's like, you know what, we're not going to get anybody here and take it serious if we don't put this out there absolute. So maybe that's the time to get it done. So, and then other times, if you are, we need if we're gonna take a property to auction with a reserve, we want it to. It's got to be a realistic reserve, and to avoid a train wreck type situation, or who knows anymore. Black swan events happen all the time. You'd hate for something to happen. This guy's life work fall the day after something like that, and
generations even.
Right, exactly. So we're certainly willing to work with anybody on that, and like I say, yes, I think different situations lend itself to different auction methods over other times.
Right. And there isn't really any restriction. Other than the fact that you've advertised it one way, but like say a black swan event does occur, the auction day comes and you're like, okay, hold on, panic sets in.
Right.
How do you handle that? Can you go a different direction even though the advertising said one thing? It gets, from an integrity standpoint or whatever, gets to be a sticky situation. But
right, yeah, I think at that point it's a little tough. Mostly a reputation type thing, and believe me, we've been in business for a while now, and reputation's a real deal. But at the end of the day, our client's day is, it's we want to do the best for them too, without tarnishing ourselves. I mean, type deal. So I think, every time we write up a flyer, announcements made, sale day, take precedence over printed material. So if we need to change something, I've never heard it change from an absolute auction to a reserved auction, but I have seen it advertised as a reserved auction, and then day of the sale they announced that it would be absolute, and so that was an interesting, or at least portions of it would be. Sure. And so I think a guy could change. If something's happening and it's not the right thing to do, we better let's pull the plug and let's change course.
If your auction was September 12th, 2001, maybe we were,
we'd maybe done something different there.
And probably everybody would understand if it's something on that level. So,
right. Yep.
Other listings, the only other listing I'm aware of is a straight listing. Is there something else that I'm not aware of, or other options?
That's primarily the way we do it. Where they talk about pocket listings and things like that are, sometimes you may know of a ranch, and sometimes there may be somebody that says, I'll list this place, don't advertise it. I don't want anybody to know I'm selling it. And those are difficult. They can be difficult. Sometimes you stumble onto the right, in your network, the right guy, and you can get something done. But mostly it's still a private treaty listing, right. Whether you advertise it or not, or whether it's on the web or not, or in print or whatever the terms of that can be.
It's going to hit the MLS, right? No matter
what.
Well,
not necessarily.
Okay.
We actually, the multiple listing service is its own association.
I see.
And so you've got to be a member of that to be on the MLS or to have your properties on there anyway. But anymore, like I say, technology is so huge anymore. Right. Zillow or Realtor.com is basically, going to overtake the MLS in my opinion. And we put stuff out there. If everybody's okay with that, we do it, and you can get it to a huge network of people that way. Yep. So.
Yeah. So when we're talking about doing a listing, some considerations there are things that you're thinking about that are going to help this be a successful opportunity. What are some of those things?
Sure. Yeah. I'll basically, like say, initially getting your property ready to go, knowing what we do have to sell. If there are restrictions, or do you want to keep the minerals or not? Do you have the mineral or not? Rights or not? And there again, in some areas down here, it's not as big a deal. If you want to sell something in North Dakota, that's going to be a real deal. So, and I'll just say it like this: you're likely not going to get mineral rights in North Dakota. So that's part of what's happening there. Time and again, of course, the commission, right? That's the biggest deal. And that was a thing I thought of too. If you do go to hire somebody, make sure you know what you are getting for that commission. Everybody charges a little different. And provide some different services, and whether they're advertising or who's paying for the advertising, and pictures and drone footage and prep work and stuff like that. But otherwise, no. As far as creating the listing, just come to terms on what you're doing, what's included in the sale. If there is some personal property or things like that, obviously, if you're selling a 3,000 acres of grass and it's got a well and pipelines and tanks, the pump should stay in the well. That's usually assumed type deal. Not, and that's happened before. That's come up. So anyway, figure out what is actually part of the offering and what it's worth. And if there are some extras, what you need to have for that, or what goes and what stays.
$2.4 million of grass, but I'm taking that $1,500 pump.
Exactly. Right. Yep. Right. So that's those can be sticking points. You'll blow you away at what will hold a deal up sometimes. But yep, some of that kind of thing is, and what's how do showings work? Does the owner need to be around? Does he want to be around or not? Who's showing it? Who has access to the property and stuff like that? And if it's a leased property, make sure that everybody's kind of on board and we're not going to get run off. Could be a upset tenant, and rightly so at times. And just make sure everybody's on the same page and has the same expectations, or a reasonably similar expectations, at least going forward.
Yeah.
So.
Well, big part of what we've been talking about here today, managing expectations all the way through, right?
Yeah, right. Timing and time frame and what you're going to get for it and stuff like that. And I don't mean that to be a cop out at all. I just mean, that there's some properties that are going to bring more that may seem like very similar properties, or some bring less, or something will take longer. But having everything is organized and presentable, and like I say, the title work, knowing what that's saying, and I mean just we've got deals that come up real regular that needs something. It's essentially clean title, but something needs tweaked or cleaned up a little bit, and that's going to take a minute, and just going to have to kind of stay moving through that process and keep the lines of communication open.
One of the things that I think is an opportunity in ranching and real estate is to purchase land somewhere else, and from a drought tolerance strategy or whatever, diversification, all these things. I think that that's an opportunity that presents it. And honestly, 90% of the people we're talking about don't live in the 5 states you're licensed in. So I think that's an opportunity there too, right? As far as people, there's ways to diversify in some of those things. So do you have any thoughts about that, or things to consider when you're talking about those kind of ideas?
Sure. Yeah. No, I've had the pleasure of doing business with a gentleman in particular that has a wide knowledge of the ag market in the Midwest. Really, he knows what the price of dryland farm ground, wheat ground in Kansas is, and what it's worth, and what the good stuff is, and where the good stuff is. And we've been fortunate enough to trade some property out here in western South Dakota, and sadly he's moved on. We sold him out here, and he's moved on. He's bought some of the best farm ground there is east of the river and in Iowa and things like that. And so it's fun to be able to tap into some of his knowledge and hear what he's thinking and what his thoughts are, and you honestly, you see some of these other huge companies, Home Depot, or insurance companies that are buying large chunks of farm ground, in Iowa or Illinois and Kansas, and they're kind of diversified that way as well. And so you do kind of get to tap in, and then so bring that to our kind of our world, so to speak. Western South Dakota is by far where we do most of the lion's share of our business. Even though we are licensed in those other states, but mostly West River, South Dakota. And so, but even within that, even from a local standpoint, we run cows as well. My dad and brother and I, our Hewitt Land Company, and another guy in Pierre. And we three run cows, and we run across 3 different counties, and we'll hail out somewhere, or we've never had a fire or anything like that, but we've sure had hoppers worse in one pasture that are in one location rather than others, and hail hit some other property and stuff like that. So it is, don't get me wrong, I would love to have a contiguous ranch and just trail cattle, but we haul them around and do that. And there is some advantage to that. You'll catch some rains in some areas that you missed at the home place or whatever. So there's that from even just an operational standpoint that can have some advantage. And then as far as some other things, you got some diversification for other property, other tenants, whether that's good or bad or not, type deal. But yeah, you capitalize on, you may have some very similar farm ground that rents for quite a little more in one area than another location. But yeah, it's you've got some opportunities to scatter around and get a feel for what's going on in the rest of the country,
and even selling some here and investing in something completely unrelated, rental income properties and those kinds of things, I think you mentioned that as well, 1031 exchanges into those kinds of things, that then you're not in the same industry and maybe you're not exposed to the same risk at the same time.
Absolutely.
And I do like I do like what you said about the owning multiple ranches even in the same neighborhood, or multiple properties even in the same neighborhood, because it's almost always cheaper to move cows to feed than it is feed to cows.
Right. Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so that becomes I think an important part of it for sure.
Right. Exactly. Yep. No, it's kind of fun. One of my favorite stories was we sold a ranch, and it was a tough decision for him to sell, but we sold it. We sold it at auction, and it did very well, and they turned it into some commercial real estate, and I got a kick out of it. The deal was they were going to buy these properties and then over the next 2 years renovate them, and I think the rent was supposed to go up after they got them renovated, and he got his new check a couple years later and just relayed the information to us at one point that he said that he called him up, said, "Yeah, I think you messed up. The check's bigger." And they said, "Nope. Remember, that's the new normal after we renovate them." He's like, "Oh, this makes a lot more money than cows." So,
yep, for sure. No, I appreciate that. I think it is an important opportunity, especially in a time like now, right? In the cattle industry, and I know not everybody's realizing the potential that this opportunity in the cattle industry, this market high presents. But you got a little extra income that you haven't had in the past. There's opportunities for expansion. There's opportunities for investing in other sectors of business,
right,
and some of those kinds of things. So I think those are pay down debt. Wherever you're at. If you're younger, like Tyson and I, of course.
Yep.
Then you are thinking invest and expand. If you're older, maybe you're thinking pay down debt, whatever. But I think there's some opportunities there, and so to that end, talk a little bit about the buying side of that. Some of the things that you kind of, when you have a guy come to you saying, "I'm looking to buy," what are some of the things that you're kind of trying to help him think through?
Sure. Yep. Nope. I obviously at this level, it's kind of like everything, right? Everything's expensive. sure has that expensive feel about it. And when you're buying acres and you pile them on top of each other, they just compound and add up pretty quickly. So everything, $1 million doesn't buy much anymore, So know what you can do financially, right? And kind of have a plan that way. And I would say if you are young starting out, go in there and make sure that banker or your lender has some confidence in you. I had a buddy that he had a 3-ring binder and it was organized. And when he sat down, you knew he had a plan, and whether it would work or not, nobody knows, but he had a plan. It wasn't going to be by the seat of his pants. And so get your homework done and kind of know what it is going to cost, know kind of what you're looking for, but also have that flexibility. Like I say in there, I tend to move a little maybe faster than some, personally speaking, and say that property will work. That's good enough. Let's get it. That'll be what, and then down the road, if what we really actually want comes up, at that point, we can decide, do we want to flip this and move into that or not? While others are saying, no, that ain't the one I want. I'm looking for this kind. So that's fine. Definitely do what you want to do, but kind of have an idea what you want. And then, be conscientious of whether you're willing to consider other opportunities or not, or what, or maybe think outside of the box. And then also on top of that, especially today, like you said, you referenced the housing market. A few years ago, it was one of those deals. If you wanted a house, if it was priced at $800,000, you just well write them an $850,000 offer, because it was going to bring more money, and you were going to have 7 other cash offers to contend with. And that doesn't feel the same way in the egg business here, but if there's a property that's competitively priced and it's kind of right, it's probably not going to last long. So kind of get your mind around that and be ready to I always tell people, don't get hasty, don't move faster than you're comfortable with moving, but if you want it, stay moving forward. And so, and then on top of that, everybody, or a common question is, will the seller take less or whatever? And like I say, every property is different. Every seller is different. We've seen properties hit the market at what I thought was a pretty strong asking price, and just a week or short period later, they sold it for a lot less than they were asking. And others, asked a lot of money for it and stayed there until they got it done, or took it off the market, or waited a few years and marked it up higher and sold it then. So yep. They're just all different,
Yeah, I bought and sold a few houses over the years, and almost every time, as I've analyzed markets, and I've come to the conclusion that at that time anyways, many of the houses were selling for right around 94% of the asking price.
Yep.
So when we bought the place that we bought here, that's what I did. Here's his asking price, 94%. That was my offer.
Really?
And he said, I would like to have more, but I'll take it.
Yep. Perfect.
And so I don't know if there's anything to that or not, or if it holds, but
I absolutely think there is. When you talked about private treaty listings, if I know you want to price it up at the top there. I mean, to where you're not leaving any money or the least amount of money on the table as possible. But it's got to be within about 10% of the market. Otherwise, you just get ghosted and you don't get them. You might show it, but you don't get any. It's tough to get offers. Yet, I will also say, being how you asked about buyers, don't be afraid to make an offer that works for you, because you do never know. I mean, the worst they can say is no, and if you tell me to drop an offer, basically the only person's time you're wasting is mine, and so that's what I'm here for. And so we can it's a Word document. We can cross that out and put a new number in if you want to come back. But get serious. I mean, get realistic about what you're going to offer. Don't be afraid to make an offer. I don't usually worry about insulting people, but if don't make a waste of time offer either. So there's a fine line somewhere in there that needs to be paid attention to. But I'd say if you're looking for property, kind of get familiar with the process, what it's going to take. Closing costs are another thing. What's typical there. Nearly every auction property, the terms are going to be that you're going to split the closing costs and the title insurance and some of the normal fees. So depending on what the property is, it's going to take another $1,000 or depending how much title insurance, what the value of the property is, it may be several thousand more, but those will be some costs to consider as well. So
sure. Dave Ramsey says, that's what his in his course, he's always saying, Dave Ramsey says, but Dave Ramsey says always involve a real estate agent. I agree. I look at it similar to the way I look at doing taxes. It's like I do a taxes so that the CPA looks it over, and then I'm less likely to end up in jail
right
for my taxes being done incorrectly. And, I sign a document that says I didn't lie to you when I gave you these numbers, but I'm just saying, I think it's good to have a professional who that's what they do all the time involved. And there are definitely advantages. Yeah, you're going to pay some commission, but I think it's usually a pretty small, in the grand scheme of things.
I agree. And and for the seller, in the lion's share in our neck of the woods, the seller is going to pay the commission on these ranch deals, and it's fun to see. Your success stories are the ones that the seller offered this section of grass to the neighbors for $1,500, and they all said, thanks, but no, and you took it to auction and got $2,000, type deal. Those are the success stories. They don't all end that way. Yeah, but in that case, the commission is pretty cheap, but yes, and then from a buyer's standpoint, a lot of us out here, us, and we'll call it, the Hayden Outdoors and the Hall and Halls are the big boys, right? But we've got a good working relationship with all of them. A lot of times they will pay a buyer agent out of their check. So if I represent you as a buyer to go buy a Hall and Hall property, they'll pay me. It's not going to cost you any more out of pocket. So, 98% of the time. So absolutely. I will say though, if you are a buyer you're looking to hire a buyer agent and work with them, let your buyer agent make first contact. There's kind of some protocol that needs to be followed, and you've got to, kind of abide within those kind of terms just a little bit anyway, and at least let them make first contact, and then you've got a track record going forward with that listing broker and can go get some business done, hopefully.
What are some of the things that you guys really try to pay attention to at Hewitt Land Company that you think sets you apart? Some of the things that you're really excited about and focused on as far as just helping people succeed in this real estate?
Sure, that's a great question. I'd say we're all men of faith, and that's a big, like I say, our reputation and our honesty, integrity, and the way we take care of people, both sides of the deal, is a big deal to us. Beyond that, we want to do a great job of marketing. I mean, we're kind of there's only 4 of us brokers in there, but we've got a full-time marketing person hired, and the office staff to kind of handle some stuff. And we try to make sure that we're up to date on what's happening, and we're paying attention to where we are. I mean, it can be very difficult to track your advertising dollars and where you're most effective, but we try to spend a little money getting that done. And getting those properties out there. We try to be in some of the same publications as some of the bigger outfits that have maybe 30 to 70 agents with them. We don't take up as much advertising, as much space on the page, maybe sometimes, but yeah, that's part of the deal. Honestly, there's the two of our agents are my dad's one of them, and the gentleman out of Pier are I'll call them it's my dad, so it's the generation older than us, and then my brother and I are the other. So we've got a little bit of both sides of the equation. My brother and I are more of the buyer type mentality, and my dad and Dan maybe more of the seller type mentality, and so they may better relate to somebody and say, well, I wouldn't as a seller, I wouldn't think that was a great idea at all. And I think, well, maybe I'm looking more out of the eyes of a buyer sometimes. And so, I mean, obviously we try to be very good at what we're doing anyway, and look at it both ways, but I'm still have a buyer tint to some of my glasses, I guess, anyway. So that's kind of fun to be able to see, and our program is we're a team-based deal. If you talk to Dad, you've talked to all of us. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not my client or his client, you're our client. And so that's we try to just take care of everybody as best we can.
Yep. And then, when you have that team-based approach, you open up your network so much more,
right?
And so that is a big deal. And I'll just say personally, your mom was my high school English teacher. I went on a mission trip with you and your wife to Mexico in 2002, and your brother was all but my roommate at Sunshine Bible Academy. So, known the Hewitt family for a long time. If you're looking to do some real estate business in that 5-state area, the Hewitt family would come highly recommended from me personally. You are also an elder at the church where I'm pastor, and so lots of crossover here.
Lots of ties. That's kind of the deal. If you don't like doing business with family, I'm not the man to talk to. We're pretty well tied in.
So this episode's going to come out somewhere in the neighborhood of May 6th. Anything that's on the horizon that you can share at this point, as far as that's concerned, or
we got some stuff we're working on. A couple of no huge deals or anything like that, but every deal's a big deal, right? Especially if you're the seller or the buyer in them. So that's the way we go about them all. But stay tuned to the website. It's all we got some social media. I don't know how to run any of it, and I'm thankful for that. And but we try to keep up with people on that. We send out e-blasts at least once a week. You can get on that, and that'll keep you up to date with what we got going on our website, of course. And we'll just try to stay up. We've got a couple of auction properties that we're talking about. Some we're darn sure doing, and others we're still working and hoping to do. So, and we've got room for more. So if anybody wants to talk, it doesn't cost anything to come out. We'd love to come visit with you, look at your property. Real estate, we do some equipment auctions and things like that too. We're happy to talk to people, see if what we do fits what they're looking for. We offer comparative market analysis in the case of like a death. You can step up the basis, or of course, sadly, there's divorces that need some settlement and things like that. That's an option, a service that we provide as well. And so, we're happy to talk real estate with anybody if you've got anything that is on your mind, and see what we can get done for you.
All right. Show notes page for today will be workingcows.net/363, and there'll be a link to HewittLandCompany.com there, and you can go there and check out. Maybe some auctions by that time will be nailed down, and you'll be able to have them advertising. I will say they do a beautiful job of marketing, and one of my favorite things, even though I'm not in the market for any ranch land, is just to watch videos of ranch land, the drone footage and everything like that. And your dad has the same golden vocal cords that you do, and so his narration always is a good part of that. So
that's a good way. He's got that. He's got the mic, and he's welcome to it. That's for sure. Tanner and I compete who does the best drone video. So we'll see.
Very good. Well, Tyson, thanks for your time today.
Yep. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Very good stuff there with Tyson. Really appreciate him taking the time to sit down and talk me through some of those things, and appreciate his contribution to the podcast. Coming up next week on the Working Cows podcast, we're going to talk to Hunter Jones from Grassroots Carbon. We're going to talk about how do we take advantage of carbon markets? What are the opportunities? What is involved in it? How do we take advantage of the opportunities presented by that? So looking forward to that coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.